Hello, I'm Daniel. I want to talk today about fear. It's something we all struggle with. All of us have big fears and small fears. We have justified fears and we have really silly ones. So, we're going to talk about fear and overcoming fear. Sometimes we have fears that don't make a whole lot of sense. So, we look for reasons to justify them. We look for reasons to justify why we're afraid of certain things. And I don't think we should hide from our fears or pretend we're not afraid. I'm all for feeling our feelings, but I also don't want fear to control us. And fear, I could use the word anxiety instead of fear. I think that would be just as good. It's often an excuse for not doing things. So I wanted to lead a meditation group and I had anxiety about it. I was afraid. I had all sorts of fears like, what if no one comes? Or what if I'm not good at this, right? And I'm still sort of anxious. Like, I didn't ask anyone if I could teach in their community. And why? Because I was sort of rejected from that once. So I have fears around that. I have anxiety around that. So instead of offering to teach in someone else's community, I did the more difficult thing of trying to start my own, which presents all sorts of its own challenges. It's all sorts of things I wasn't prepared for, and a lot of struggles. And because of that, it presented all kinds of different fears. What if I'm not doing this right? What if no one's interested in what I have to say? But the thing about meditation practice is, it doesn't matter if no one's interested in doing it with me. I can still do it, and setting aside that time and place is important. So I want you to know that if you have fears that are stopping you from taking action that you want to take, if there's something you want to do and you're holding back because you're afraid you can't, and again, I'm not talking about pretending that fear doesn't exist. I'm talking about not having excuses. I'm suggesting you recognize that fear and maybe do the thing anyway. You're not messed up because you're afraid, or rather, not more messed up than me or anyone else. We're all human, and we all have some fears that make sense and some that don't. In ancient times, our ancestors had to hide from tigers. They needed a lot of fear just to move through the world and not die. In our world, we don't have to hide from tigers. Instead, we have to worry about credit card debt and screwing up our kids. The thing is, these things won't kill us, probably. So the anxiety in our brains doesn't really match our reality. We have a lot more anxiety than is actual present danger. We respond like things are dangerous that aren't. A majority of us have these fears that are really just telling ourselves stories. This could go wrong. That could go wrong. So many of the stories we tell ourselves are bad. I wonder if we can shift things a little and maybe think about what could go right instead of thinking about what could go wrong. We're creating most of our own fears and anxiety by worrying about what could go wrong. The truth is, a lot of things are not going to go wrong. The exception, of course, is if you're actually in a dangerous situation. But the truth is, those are rare, aren't they? I spend a lot more time worrying about what's going on at my job or what's going on with my kids than I do about being murdered or struck by lightning, right? If I was in situations where those things are more likely, then those would be very healthy fears, but I'm not. And there are things that scare us because they're designed to stimulate dangerous situations. Like roller coasters scare the shit out of me. And some people get joy out of that sort of fear, and I don't. But that's a simulation of a dangerous situation. Some people get joy out of that because we're not facing tigers, because we have this fear in the back of our minds, this tendency to fear that's not being used as much as it could be. But I'm not talking about that so much as those fears that are stopping us, the things that make you afraid to apply for the promotion, afraid to ask out the person, afraid to start your own business. Whatever. We're living in chains and forgetting that we have the keys. We're telling ourselves negative things, and we have the power to tell ourselves something else. We have to be brave. It's hard to be brave. It's hard to put yourself out there. It's hard to give yourself a chance to fail, to be wrong, to make mistakes. It's easier to be comfortable and do nothing, to not be vulnerable or take risks. There's this episode of Friends, the TV show Friends, where Monica encourages Chandler to ask a girl out. And she says, "What's the worst that could happen?" And Chandler says, "I could die." Which is really silly, but in a way, that's what we're talking about. Most fears are nonsense. Most fears are Chandler saying, "I could die." Think about all the things that make you worry. Try to make a list of how many of those things could actually kill you. I'm sure some could, but most couldn't, right? And I'm talking about those fears that paralyze you from taking action that you want to take. I wanted to start a meditation group. I delayed for a long time because I had fears and anxiety. I applied for a promotion at work more than once, even though I was afraid I wouldn't be able to handle it. And I took on added responsibility of being a union steward. So now I pretty consistently have to be engaged in interpersonal communication, which makes me way more nervous than public speaking does. I think I'm the opposite of most people in that way. But I'm engaged in interpersonal communication all the time because of these responsibilities at my job. If we can put our fears into some perspective, then they're easier for us to handle, I think. The motivational speaker and entrepreneur Gary Vee said that he deals with fear by thinking about his family dying, which sounds gruesome, but it's kind of creepy. But when you think of really awful things, then you think, well, whatever happens as a result of this can't be that bad. Can't be that bad. So I'll be uncomfortable in front of a bunch of people. I'll be uncomfortable talking to someone, but so what? So what? I'm not going to die. Nobody's going to die. So I wanted to suggest that you think about things that really scare you and analyze these feelings. What happens when we feel fear, but we don't try to hide from it or run away? That's where our power is. The fear of the risk is almost always worse than the risk. I rode a roller coaster and it scared the shit out of me. But going towards the drop was way worse than the drop was. That moment before it goes down was horrifying. That's how fear works. Make a list of the things you're afraid of, then challenge yourself to see if they make sense. All that power can be yours. Which fears are holding you back from what you want to do? I'm afraid to introduce myself to new people. Shaking hands, saying hello, that stuff gives me anxiety, and it's a normal part of life, so it's a fear I have to face. It's a fear that's irrational. There's nothing bad that can happen, really. What's the worst thing? I introduce myself and they think I'm boring or weird? So I used to have this fear of introducing myself to someone and not hearing them when they tell me their name. That really, I'm anxious about that, because I think knowing someone's name is important. So I'm anxious about that, and I'm in my head, and I'm thinking, what if I don't hear this person's name? And then, you know what? I don't hear their name. I've gotten into really actively listening in those situations because that's the only way I can overcome that fear. And that's the other thing. Usually with fears like that, there is something we can do. So that's all I have for today. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this talk. Have a good day.